Hello everyone, my name is Ethan DeLuca and I'm a sophomore computer science student in the Randall Research Scholars Program. I've been working under Dr. Alexey Volkov on his project, Computational Modeling of Laser Powder Bed Fusion Additive Manufacturing. My role on this project has been to try and increase the speed that computer simulations run at, although before I get into that, I'll go through some background. So this is a video of what's essentially traditional 3D printing, fused deposition modeling, where in this sped up video, a moving print head deposits successive layers of molten plastic on top of an object, in this case the Eiffel Tower. It works kind of like a hot glue gun because it melts that plastic, puts it down, the plastic then cools, and it can then construct successive layers to build up an object over time. Fused deposition modeling is a very versatile form of 3D printing, and it's also fairly cheap, which is why it's used to create things from structural parts to toys to decorations, although one of its limitations is the kind of material that can be used. It requires a kind of material, like a thermoplastic, that has a relatively low melting point so that it can actually melt the substance and put it down in layers. So what happens when we want to 3D print metal? Metal has a much higher melting point than plastic, and because of that, fused deposition modeling, what you saw before, becomes a pretty unattractive option for 3D printing metal. So what do we do? One of these options is powder bed fusion. It's a significantly different method than fused deposition modeling, and we'll see a video of it now. So what you're looking at is a piece of solid metal in the middle of a tray of metal dust, the powder bed. The first thing that you're going to see here is an arm, the relocator blade, move across and brush a very thin, very even layer of metal dust to cover the part that was already there. Next thing is the laser. A high-intensity laser shoots down from above, controlled by a moving mirror, to fuse metal dust back onto the metal object. That is how it adds another layer. After this process has been done many times, layer after layer of metal dust getting fused onto the object, we are left with a finished project that just needs to be dusted off to remove all of the excess metal dust and optionally subjected to some post-processing. So that is a general overview of powder bed fusion, and here's another graphic to demonstrate how it works. But there are actually very many variables that need to be optimized to ensure that these parts are produced at a sufficiently high quality at a sufficiently fast pace. For example, how intense should the laser be? How quickly should it move? What temperature should everything be at? What kind of metal powder are you using? Those variables and everything else, and many others, need to be optimized in order to produce the best results, but they are difficult to determine experimentally. One of those reasons is just that if you want a machine that's capable of doing what you're seeing now, you'll be looking at a six-figure price tag, not to mention the cost of personnel and the metal powder, which can be relatively expensive. All of that is why we turn to simulations. Simulations provide a convenient alternative for ensuring that we can get the best understanding of these complex interactions between these variables without actually having to have access to a powder bed fusion machine. Specifically, we have been using a kind of physics simulation known as smooth particle hydrodynamics, which, as you can see here, simulates a fluid, in this case water, by modeling many different particles. These particles are not atoms or molecules. They are essentially, in this case, water droplets. But each one represents a fixed mass that can then be simulated by calculating each particle's interactions with each other. And again, these small blue spheres are not floating in anything. They are the fluid. Here's an example of SPH from one of our simulations, which shows a laser drilling into a block of metal. And although you can't make out every single SPH particle here, everything that you see is a small particle. So I said that simulations were a much more convenient way of determining some of the complex interactions between these variables in powder bed fusion, but they are still not very fast. They need to be run at such a high resolution that simulations can still take days or even weeks to complete. And that's why I have been working towards reducing the time that it takes to complete these simulations. I have been doing that by trying to move processing power from the CPU to the GPU, which I'll explain now. CPU, Central Processing Unit, is called the brain of your computer, essentially. It has these things called threads, 4 of them, 8 of them, 16 of them, and each one can do a separate task. For example, one might be loading your email, another one might be displaying a YouTube video, another one might be controlling your mouse cursor. Each one of these threads is very powerful, and they can be used to accomplish a wide variety of complex calculations, although they're not well suited to every single task. For example, a standard resolution monitor has just over 2 million pixels on it that need to be updated 60 times every second. And even though CPU threads are powerful, the sheer amount of work, even though they are simple calculations, will still make the CPU ill-suited to that task. That's where GPUs come in. Graphics processing units are used to do just what a CPU cannot, which is a large number of calculations that are relatively simple. Whereas CPUs have 4, 8, 16 threads, a GPU will have hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands. Each one is a lot less powerful, but together they can be used to accomplish a very large amount of very small calculations, such as calculating the colors of pixels, or in our case, determining the interactions between many very small SPH particles in a physics simulation. I've been working to transition some of the code from running on the CPU to running on the GPU in hopes of getting a performance benefit, and I've been doing that using the NVIDIA HPC SDK. That stands for High Performance Computing Software Development Kit, and it's a suite of tools designed by NVIDIA to enable programmers like me to write code that can run on supercomputer GPUs, which is exactly what we are trying to do. So I've been taking the pre-existing CPU-only code and transitioning it to be a hybrid mix of CPU and GPU code. And one of the reasons I chose the NVIDIA HPC SDK is because it allows me to not worry about a lot of the low-level details about GPU programming, such as where memory transfers occurs, because it handles all of that essentially behind the scenes and enables me to write in standard C++. One of the challenges I've run into, however, is the memory transfer bottleneck. So CPUs and GPUs have their separate sets of memory, which is where they store all of the data necessary for the calculations that they do. And although they can both access their own memory very quickly, transferring data between the two is, by comparison, very slow. This is a problem because when I modify the codes that only part of it runs on the GPU, there will need to be very frequent transfers of data back and forth so that both the CPU and the GPU can essentially collaborate on the simulation. This means that even though the GPU might be doing work faster, the time it takes just to move the data back and forth might still make the program overall slower. That's one of the reasons why the code I've been working on has actually been slower than the baseline CPU-only code until recently, which I've gotten it to break even. So just to reiterate everything, code is run on the GPU instead of just on the CPU to try to get a performance benefit compared to the CPU-only code that I was using before. And the NVIDIA HPC SDK allows me to do this with relative ease because I can write in standard C++ what I'm used to, and it will handle a lot of the low-level details such as where memory needs to be transferred. If I use something else, like CUDA, which is another option, I would need to put in every single manual memory transfer, every single spot that data needs to be accessed from the CPU or the GPU, instead of having that done automatically. One of the problems I run into is slow GPU-CPU memory transfer, which has caused the code's performance to decrease, though I have gotten around this partially by enabling a lot of the code to be run on the GPU, because if much of the code is run on the GPU, then it will not have to transfer data back to the CPU as frequently as if only a smaller amount of code was run on the GPU and it had to constantly collaborate. For future directions, the code that has been used is designed to run on Alabama's supercomputer, which consists of many, many CPUs, as well as GPUs, although those aren't being used by our current code. And the code I am working on is currently designed to just be run on one GPU. So I will continue to increase its speed and also enable it to be run on multiple GPUs in preparation of when it will actually be deployed on one of Alabama's supercomputer clusters. I would like to thank the University of Alabama, the Randall Research Scholars Program, and of course Dr. Volkov for enabling me to participate in this project, which I have enjoyed very much, and thank you all for listening. I will now take any questions.
On slide 11, you mentioned using the NVIDIA HPC SDK. Are there any alternatives to the HPC SDK?
Mm-hmm. There are many alternatives to the HPC SDK, well, a handful, that are designed to run on various different GPUs. One of those is also made by NVIDIA. It's called CUDA. And while CUDA can be used to get a very large performance increase out of GPUs, it requires very fine-tuned control, which is something that, although it might have a performance increase, is difficult to do with a large amount of code just because of the sheer amount of code that needs to be written.
So you mentioned that your simulations can take days, if not weeks, in their current state. Obviously, you're working on optimizing the runtime of those simulations. So are you working with some sort of smaller simulation or different data set where you can better determine those type of statistics without taking weeks between each run?
Yes. I'm working on a very reduced subset of a simulation that can be run in just under a minute on a normal computer so that I can quickly evaluate performance advantages. And then eventually I'll be working on larger data sets that will be more reflective of the actual performance increases, but just small ones for now.
Quick reminder, what is a CPU and what is a GPU?
So a CPU and a GPU are two essential parts in every computer, where a CPU essentially handles a lot of the, I wouldn't say day-to-day tasks, but it controls a lot of your computer that is not handled by the GPU, because the GPU is just well suited to doing a very large amount of very small computations, which are normally graphics, but can also be used for stuff like AI, physics simulation, and many other problems.
Okay, we have a very special award at this time. So Ethan is recipient of the Joe Clark Focus Presenter Award, a new award we're doing. We have Joe with us, so we'll let Joe present this award. It also accompanies a bottle of Clear Eyes for all the focusing that Ethan's been doing. So we'll allow Joe to present this. We'll take a photo, and then we'll conclude. Of course. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.